If you are on the hunt for a literary agent to help you publish your book with a major publishing house, you may have found that there are hundreds of agents and dozens of agencies out there. You may not know where really to begin with your search. How do you go about choosing which agents to reach out to? They may all look great, but how do you determine which might be a perfect fit for your book project and who is really going to potentially respond well to your query letter? If you've been to my channel before, you may have noticed I've covered what agents are looking for in writers that they bring onto their lists. I've talked about what goes into a successful query letter, and I've also done a video on some potential reasons why an agent has rejected your query letter or your sample pages. But today, I really want to give you some tactical tips for how to actually go about finding those names of the agents that you want to reach out to so that you can approach them in a really thoughtful way. It's important to note that you really should think strategically about the agents that you contact. It really is almost like applying for a job. It's going to be much more successful if you do your research and you really take your time to think through why you're the best fit for that agent, just as you would with a job and describing in your cover letter why you're a really good fit for that role. You want to make sure that you really think through each and every one of your queries and make sure that that agent really is a person who could partner with you on your publishing journey. Now, if you are in the process of trying to get published, head over to my channel and hit that subscribe button. I offer weekly videos with a lot of publishing advice and writing tips geared towards authors who are working on book-length manuscripts. So with that, I'm going to dive into the 5 legitimate ways you can go about finding names of literary agents that you want to reach out to. Now, the very first place that you want to look to find the names of potential literary agents to reach out to is your own bookshelf. So I challenge you to go over there right now, open up some of your favorite books or books that have a similar feel to your project that you're working on. Turn to the very back and open up the acknowledgements page. More often than not, the author will have listed their literary agent on that acknowledgements page to thank them for the work that they did to help them get published. Now, if your project falls in line with that book, and it's a book that you really loved and enjoyed, that automatically gives you a connection to that agent. So then look them up online, see if they're accepting queries, and then in your query letter, specifically mention that you loved this book that they worked on with that author. The agent is immediately going to see that you did your research, you knew that they are the one who helped that author publish their book, and they're going to really appreciate that you have that connection and that you enjoyed that book as much as they did. If your book really is similar to the book that you are reaching out to the agent about, it is much more likely that you're going to be able to convince that agent that your project is also a great fit for their list. If you have exhausted the books on your bookshelf, check out your friend's bookshelf, your partner's bookshelf, your parents' bookshelf, but also go to a brick and mortar bookstore and just browse the fiction or nonfiction section, whatever genre you are operating in. Head over there and look at some of the new release titles, or maybe, some older titles that you aren't as familiar with. You don't necessarily have to have read those books. Just pick them up, read a few pages, read the blurb, see which ones are in the same vein as yours. For instance, if you are writing a historical novel that takes place in World War II, go over to Barnes & Noble and see what is being sold in that same genre, other World War II historical novels. And if there's one that seems like it would appeal to the same readers that you are targeting with your novel, head on over to that acknowledgements page, look at it, and take note of who that agent was. And then you can mention that book whenever you reach out to them in your query letter. You don't need to necessarily have read the book in your query letter in that case. If you haven't read the book and you don't have a direct connection with it, you can say something like, I'm reaching out to you because you represented X book, and I really feel like my project appeals to that same group of readers. That is a perfectly legitimate way to approach an agent, and again, it really does show that you did your research, you understand the types of projects they work on, and you understand how your book fits into the market. Now, the second place that you want to go to search for a literary agent is through the industry databases that exist online. So the two that I really recommend are querytracker.com and manuscriptwishlist.com. These two databases are full of information about agents who are currently accepting submissions, and they seem to be the most widely used by agents in the industry and the most frequently updated. So that's always where I direct writers when they ask me where I can go to find a literary agent. What you're going to see in those databases are the names of the agents, the agencies that they work at, maybe their direct submissions email inbox, or maybe even their direct personal email address. And you're going to see a list of genres that they represent and potentially a bio with some more detailed information about them. What is going to be most helpful for you is to look at that genre list. Obviously, you only want to reach out to agents who are actively seeking submissions within your genre. So some of these databases will allow you to search and filter by genre. So again, in that example of someone who is writing a historical fiction novel, you would go into that database and search for agents specifically looking for historical fiction. But don't stop there. This is really an issue that I see with writers when they are building their query lists and preparing to reach out to agents. They look at that database, they look at QueryTracker, and they see every single agent that is looking for historical fiction, and boom, 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 they blast mail their query to every single one of them. You really don't want to do that. The reason why you don't want to do that is because you really should dive deeper into each agent's bio and the list of authors that they represent to really ensure that your specific flavor of historical fiction does match what they're looking for. Again, to go with the example we've been using, if it is a World War II historical fiction novel really targeted towards women's book clubs, for instance, that is very different from a military historical fiction novel really geared toward people who have an interest in aviation or military history. Those are two very different feels of historical fiction, different readerships. Likely, the agent that represents one is not going to represent the other. However, on QueryTracker or Manuscript Wishlist, it's likely that both of those agents have just put historical fiction as something that they're interested in. So that's really why you need to dive deeper into every agent's bio, look at their agency website, really dive deep into the books that they have represented, the authors that they've represented. Again, I'm not saying you need to read all of the books that they've represented. I'm not saying you need to recognize the authors. However, you should at least be able to get a sensibility for if the types of projects they are representing fall in line with the novel that you're working on. That said, these industry databases are a key component of your query search. It is pretty much a given that you're going to need to use them, but as I say, just be careful and be really thoughtful about how you use them, and don't just query every single agent that lists the genre that you're working on. So the next way to find a literary agent is to attend writing events and conferences. So this is obviously very tough in the COVID era, though I'm sure there are different types of events going on online. However, thinking back to, the before times, what this would often entail is agents from mostly based in New York City would fly out to these various conferences, and they would host pitch sessions with authors who are attending that conference. Sometimes the pitch sessions may be included in your conference fees. Other times you might need to pay a little bit extra to reserve a slot to pitch an agent, and it would basically be like a speed dating session. The room would be set up with all these little tables, and you would sit face to face with an agent and get 5-10 minutes to pitch your book project to them and potentially get some interesting feedback. Now again, I'm sure there is some kind of online version of this going on right now, but that is how it would run down traditionally. It's important to know that just because you have attended a writing conference and you did sign up for a pitch session, that really does not guarantee that that agent is going to be interested in your book project. It definitely doesn't guarantee that they are going to offer you representation or even want to look at your full manuscript. However, that is definitely a possibility, and that's why I always do encourage you to take advantage of those opportunities. Even if the agent doesn't end up responding well to your pitch or your book, it'll still really help you learn how to pitch your project and that agent may be able to give you a little bit of constructive feedback even in that brief exchange with them. So it's definitely still a valuable tool to get feedback on your pitch and a sense for how an agent might respond to your project. Now, going to writing events and conferences is helpful just in a more broader networking perspective as well. At these events, you're going to meet other authors and other publishing professionals even outside of that official pitching session, who could potentially connect you to an agent. So really take it as an opportunity to mingle, as much as I know some writers probably would prefer not to, but really go out of your comfort zone, meet people, and maybe you will meet an author who already has an agent and could connect you. Maybe you'll meet an editor who has a connection that they could make to an agent. Moving on to the next place that you can go to find a literary agent, love it or hate it, it is Twitter. So many agents are very active on Twitter. Many publishing professionals in general, editors, agents, authors, the whole spectrum of publishing industry is very active on Twitter. If the agent is active on Twitter, it can really give you a good sense of their taste and the types of books that they like to work on. As I said before, that is so critical for you to understand if your book is in the same sensibility and has the same flavor as the other books that the agent is interested in. On Twitter, the agent might be retweeting things from publishers about book releases that they're excited about. That could give you an indication of the types of books that they are interested in reading. They could be explicitly calling out the types of submissions that they want to be seeing from authors, and they may even use the hashtag MSWL, which is the manuscript wishlist hashtag, and that's really where that database came from. They might even call that out in their tweets and say, this is what I'm looking for in submissions. And in general, Twitter is a place to really connect more personally with agents. They might talk about a trip that they're taking. They might talk about a hobby that they have. And if you have some type of connection with them in that way, that could potentially be something that you could naturally draw out in the query. Obviously, don't force it if it feels awkward, but still it's a good idea to get a sense of who they are, what they're interested in, and the types of books that they take onto their list. Now, what I don't recommend is directly DMing agents on Twitter. It is unlikely that they're going to respond to you unless they have, asked you to DM them, and it could be viewed as unprofessional. So you definitely want to always go through their direct submissions line and follow to a T all of these submissions instructions that are listed on their agency website. Do not go into their DMs. However, do check out their tweets and see what they're writing about, see what they're interested in. The last way to find a literary agent is actually for the agent to find you. So we often think about an agent only being acquired through a query letter and a submission and the writer initiating that connection, but agents actually do recruit new writers on their own as well. They are talent acquisition professionals, and as such, they are almost like recruiters, always looking out for new and up-and-coming writers who potentially could be interested in a book project. In particular, agents who are earlier in their career will likely be more actively seeking out writers whose work that they are interested in and potentially taking them on as a client. So what this might look like is an agent finding a short story that you published in a literary magazine. They could see that and read that and then be really intrigued by your writing style and then reach out to you and see if you might be seeking representation for a book-length work. They could also find you in online magazines, or if you have any publications in traditional newspapers, things like that. Agents do read widely across all these different types of publications, and they do reach out to writers who intrigue them, especially if they see a potential book opportunity with that writer, such as if they've written a bunch of articles on a certain topic of interest. They might reach out to that writer and say, have you ever thought about writing a book on this? I'd love to work with you on that. So I know this tip doesn't really give you any immediate action that you can take, but it is really good to know. So if you are someone who is publishing shorter works in literary journals or in online magazines, keep doing that if that is something that you enjoy, because that is a way for an agent to potentially find you. So those are the top 5 legit ways to go about finding a list of literary agents that you would like to reach out to potentially represent your book to a publisher. I literally recommend making a Google Sheet or an Excel spreadsheet with all of this information and to mark the dates that you send out your queries just to keep track of who you have reached out to and if you got a response or not. Now remember, querying can be a long and tedious process. As I said before, it really is like a job hunt, really trying to search for that exact right match and that exact right fit. So I encourage you to keep your head up. If you're in the midst of querying or if you're beginning the journey, don't get discouraged even if you do get rejections. There are hundreds of agents out there and there's pretty much always someone else you can reach out to in order to find that fit. If you're looking to learn a little bit more about how the publishing process works and how the literary agent fits into that, check out my video on how to get published at a Big 5 house for an overview of the entire process from start to finish.